And today we have a really interesting guest with us, Dr. Anton Chuvakin. Am I pronouncing that correctly, by the way?
You are, in fact, yes, Anton
All right.
Chuvakin. I mean, I guess the original pronunciation would be Anton, not Anton, but I've been Anton for so long that I almost can relate to that and respond to Anton if need be.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I understand very much. I used to be Maxim and now I'm Max. So it's good.
Oh,
Thanks a lot for joining us. Maybe you want to start by doing a quick introduction?
sure. My name is Anton, or Anton, as I just pointed out. I do work for Google Cloud Office of the CISO, which is a very interesting job in the sense that I work for a Google Cloud CISO, but most of my mission is probably customer facing, but I'm also not a field CISO of any kind because we typically deal with people who already use Google Cloud and other clouds. And our mission is to kind of help them with security. We with a charter somewhere which basically covers securing cloud, securing customers, and securing the world. And I think securing the world part is, of course, in a somewhat overly broad Google style mission, organize the world information. And in this case, it's secure the world, which makes me engage with all sorts of fun people everywhere. And generally speaking, help them with all sorts of security challenges. Of course, I like everything to do with security operations and SOC and DNR. But in terms of the hours spent at work, lately, most of my time was spent on securing AI. It's all sorts of interesting side challenges from dealing with shadow AI at clients, uh, looking at frameworks for securing AI, and of course, at some point there will be an overlap between detection and response for AI workloads and fun stuff like that. I do run, as somebody wisely pointed out, and it was not me. I didn't pay them to point out the podcast that I run for. I mean, it's called Cloud Security Podcast by Google, and it's there's a funny story behind the name. There's a funny story behind the boring name. We wanted to do a podcast, so we did a lot of naming discussions and contests and talk to people, and we thought we'll call it Weather and Security because of cloud, weather, and then we ask the naming team. Naming team, what do you think? A naming team is like, no, you have to have a descriptive name. What are you doing? A podcast. What is it about? Cloud security. It should be called Cloud Security Podcast. We argued, we squealed, we screamed, we escalated. Cloud Security Podcast. And then we used up a final argument. Hey guys, there's already a podcast called Cloud Security Podcast. Are you sure you want us to be called that? And they said, we don't really care. But you have to call it Cloud Security Podcast. So, and of course, it's called Cloud Security Podcast by Google to differentiate from a Cloud Security Podcast. Space, nothing else. But we've been living like that for 3 years. Some people say that we suffer as a result, and maybe we do, but we can't change it. We're not renaming it now, and it's kind of too late for that. But that's the story behind the somewhat boring name. It was picked by a naming team.
It's a quintessential, very big company story. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other part that I'm excited, I want to kind of call out for people that maybe don't know you is, I think you come in with a really interesting perspective in the industry, across kind of two different dimensions. One being the breadth that you've kind of mentioned. You talk to all kinds of people, all kinds of companies. In your previous life, you were also an industry analyst. So, that was your job to get that exposure. And the other dimension is over time. So you've been in cybersecurity for a while. And so I feel like those two things together, bring a really interesting perspective on this. And so as a segue to this, I know you kind of had like two topics that you were thinking maybe to discuss. Do you want to take us through it and pick your favorite?
Yes. So it's kind of started from a bit of an obsession I had. And it's an obsession focused on the fact that a lot of people adopt technology when they're not ready for it. I've seen it a lot in my Gartner days. I've seen a lot of the examples where somebody has, a degree of process maturity at some level, and then suddenly they pick a piece of tech and just like plop it in the middle, and the tech just doesn't match the rest of the operations. So this is kind of like a hand wavy and then possibly somewhat not exciting topic, but the reason is that it produced interesting results. I've had people where they had some sort of advanced tooling, but the process was kind of in the 90s. And I've seen examples of all sorts. Lately, I've taken another look at vulnerability management, where a lot of 90s are still very much alive at many companies. And I've talked to somebody, and this would be a podcast in a couple of weeks on that. I talked to somebody about this topic, and it's a detour, but I promise I'll reconnect it to the main topic. And I sort of made one of more 90s jokes talking about VM. And the guy from Indian said, you know what? I'm old, and I was doing this in the 90s. Our company in the 90s was better than some of the companies today. And I'm like, okay, I should shut up with the 90s jokes, because it's just that there's always a range of maturity, and some organizations are just like not ahead. But sometimes people pick something that is from far outside of where they are. It's almost like you can barely drive, but you buy a Ferrari, whatever else. And you're right. When I say maturity, some people cringe and they assume that I would bring the 5-level maturity chart. And I can bring this. I've made a few of them at Gartner, but here I'm just using the term intuitively. Like somebody is more, again, another Gartner age example. Somebody would call Gartner and say, I'll obscure the details so it's not breaking any NDAs. Hey, we patch Windows twice a year. Is this frequent enough? And we would be like, and we check the calendar. Does it say the 90s? And of course, in the late 90s, people would not patch Windows twice a year. They would patch more often than that. So it's like, I don't know, early 90s. And we'd be like, how do we respond to them without cursing? And but the point is that there is a maturity, like in this case, it's an intuitive maturity. Clearly, the IT operations maturity and their security maturity were quite low. But there are many caveats to that. So let's shove maturity aside. So where it brings me is that I see a lot of security operations centers or detection and response teams, and I see a lot of vendors that call themselves AI SOC. I'm not going to make any AI SOC jokes. Well, not yet, because the way I pacified it in my mind, I say I believe in AI in SOC, but I don't believe in AI SOC. Because for people who say AI SOC, they imply that AI is the SOC. But I don't think that AI is the SOC for anybody, but I do believe in AI use cases in the SOC. So it's the in that makes it palatable to me. So where I'm going with that, I've seen a lot of vendors who sell AI SOC, and I've seen a lot of SOCs. And when they combine in the same space and time, occasionally a lot of hilarity ensues, because the SOCs just aren't ready for it. Or the teams aren't ready, the tooling isn't ready, nothing is ready. But the vendor shows up, waves AI SOC label in the air, and sometimes the big boss or the big boss's boss buys it anyway. So I wanted to check what is the more formal way or more practical way, formal and practical at the same time, to judge is your SOC or detection response team, for those of you objecting to the SOC label, as my colleagues at Google would, how to know that your SOC is ready for it. So I've cooked something up a few weeks back after a lot of agonizing, and I guess I did promise no slides, so I can share the excerpt from a blog if I had sharing on Zoom, and kind of talk you through where my mind was when I was making it, if it makes sense. Because the idea is that I feel like there are 5 big buckets of 5 big buckets of stuff that I can use to decide whether somebody is ready for AI in a SOC. And before I even go there, I wanted to point out that when I posted it somewhere online, somebody said, Anton, hold on. You should first decide if your SOC is automation ready. And this to me is a profound comment, because some SOCs are in the pre-automation age. Like imagine this, the time before SOAR, which means what? 2000, super early 2010s, late 2000s. And That was a appropriately depressing comment. Well, we do cybersecurity, so depressing comments are a must. But I leave this aside. I feel like it's a very astute comment, but I just want to leave this aside. If the SOC is not automation ready, it's probably not AI ready. To me, it's kind of a Venn diagram with a large overlap. So where I'm going with that, I feel like the first hurdle people have when they try to adopt AI is that some form of chatbot, some form of LLM, some form of AI agent would have machine access to data. And by machine, I mean it's not a human logging into a terminal window, doing a couple of SSH commands and seeing something. I think it should be automated using API, using whatever else. So to me, I'm bringing this up as first because I've seen enough companies with very outdated SIEMs that didn't even have APIs in SIEMs, or APIs are allowing them very limited access to very limited data. So to me, the data access is probably where my mind went first. This was basically the foundational idea for this concept, is to say, okay, if your data isn't ready to be easily, quickly obtained by machines, you're not going to succeed with AI. It may be painfully obvious to some, but it's actually surprisingly insidious and surprisingly weird, because there are some people who assume that because AI agents can obtain almost any data, learn how to program an API themselves, or screen scrape, or take screenshots and analyze the images, they sort of assumed that this is not a constraint. So I've met people who said, but Anton, and this is an extreme case, it was in the context of federated SIEM. But Anton, I don't need any of this stuff. I can just have my agents go and obtain the data. And I'm like, what? I know, yeah, imagine the data is this in S3 bucket and they would like go and access it. And it's like, yeah, okay, in your example, that's fine. But if the data is in a freaking mainframe, how would your agents do it? And they'd be like, oh, we're going to screen scrape from terminal windows. And I'm like, okay, that's very creative. That is very creative. And that's very, very modern, like if it were the 80s. But the problem with that is that it can be done theoretically, but practically you're not going to obtain a gigabyte of logs by screen scraping from terminal windows. And then people said, oh, okay, I guess you're right. So this pillar was born as an argument that if machines would be playing a bigger role in your SOC, they would have the automated, scalable, reliable access to data, and it should be good data too, because I'm old enough to suffer from log4j log parsing in the old SIEMs. It was really not a fun task, especially when logs were stored in databases and many log records were like syslog sized, and then somebody shows up and says, here's my 64 kilobyte logs from the Java application. And everybody's like, what do we do with it? So the point is that the challenges exist today, and it's not just the data availability, quality, structure to some extent. And this, to me, what sunk or limited the value of many AI in a SOC projects is that they just couldn't shove the data to machines at the speed the machines needed it. Would you prefer I kind of stop after each of the 5 and ask for comments, or I can go through all 5 and then ask for comments, or something? Like what's the preference?
No, I think it's good if you want to keep going. If anybody wants to chime in, obviously, feel free to jump in. I see some interesting stuff in the chat already. So
yeah, I'll try to glance at the chat once in a while. Yes, yeah,
it's hard.
Yeah. And I think that the comment somebody made about SOAR playbooks and automation brings us exactly to the second point. I did say process maturity, so please don't hold it against me. I did put it at the end. But the main idea behind this argument was that I've seen enough SOCs when the process is very ad hoc, and it's ad hoc is in like I'm triaging the signal, and I look at something and I'm like, I have no idea what this is. I can't right click on anything. I have to call somebody and say, hey, do you know what this is? And they say, actually, no, I don't. But I think this other guy knows. And I call him up or message him or Slack him or, chat him. And he says, yeah, I used to know it in the previous release, but now Joanna knows this. And then I message Joanna and says, oh, yeah, this system does this. But this process is very ad hoc and it's very human heavy. And so in theory, you can have a SOAR playbook that says, go figure it out, like the step, but it's probably not a great SOAR playbook. So to me, the not having playbooks or not having a process that's even amenable to playbooks is a big hurdle. And if a lot of this is very much like nobody knows what to do, but may know who knows, let's call them. And I think I found a fun quote in a paper that somebody wrote about very different subject is, if your teams don't know who owns what, neither will your agents. To me, this is a reasonable summary of this, because what I observed is people whose SOCs or other security processes are very human heavy, human to human interactions at human speed also, as somebody wisely pointed out in comments. Sorry, but it would be really hard. And then, of course, there would be an AI fanboy who shows up and says, but Anton, AI is really smart. The agents can figure it out. In theory, and given sufficient development of AI, they may not be wrong. But today, in real deployments, they probably are. Namely that, yes, can I imagine a chatbot calling somebody, talking to them, collecting audio input, parsing and figuring out who to call next? Yeah, in theory, it's conceivable. But in practice, it's probably not what you'd have. And also, no AI SOC vendor would sell you a phone conversation module or something. Maybe, but then again, the bots have been chatting people for quite some time. So this part is there. So it's a kind of a human intelligible process, as somebody wisely pointed out. Intelligible process is paramount. I like the word quite a bit because it's not formal. It's not necessarily even structured, but it's intelligible. It's the process that you can explain to a robot. That's kind of the idea. I've seen the third one is probably the fuzziest. And the reason it's the fuzziest is because I've seen enough people who think of AI SOC as actually AI SOC. They kind of want to shoot off the humans. Their secret goal is to kill off the humans. And at RSA this year in 25, a colleague from a major consulting firm came to me and said, Anton, some dude just came from Davos and his CEO thinks he would get rid of IT in 2 years because he thinks every technical job would be done by machines. Not every security job, not every SecOps job, every technical job. And I'm like, holy cow, what an idiot. And he said, well, I'm a big consultant at big four firm. I can't tell him what an idiot. I have to give him a nuanced answer why it may not happen in 2 years also. So, but if the management of quote unquote our SOC in question is in that camp of a human replacement business, we don't need tier 1 analysts, we have AI. We don't need tier 2 analysts, we have AI. We don't need analysts, we have AI. We don't need analysts, engineers, or anybody in the vicinity of SOC because we have AI. Are the ever more extreme versions of that. And I think I don't want to, for now, promote too much of my other work, because ultimately it's not a Anton blog ad. But there was a blog which was titled "A Brief Guide for Dealing with Humanless SOC Idiots." Like, that's an actual title, which was inspired by that conversation at RSA, because I wanted to write a guide for myself which doesn't involve too many curse words, to explain to somebody who thinks that in 1 year or in 2 years, all these jobs would be just gone forever and machines would do all of that. So I wanted to write a somewhat polite and somewhat being very load-bearing guide of how to talk to these people without going insane. And if you have that culture in a SOC, then this would be a big constraint with AI adoption. At least that's what I observed. If they have the replacement mindset, yeah, there's probably no path to walk today. And then somebody, when I was brainstorming this, I had a chat with somebody who said that actually they should also be comfortable with machines making mistakes. And I thought for a second, and I was like, yeah, that is a really good point as well. Because to me, this is part of the human-machine interaction, that if you have an impression that self-driving cars are 10 times safer, but every crash is kind of more dangerous than a human crash, then you would not adopting them, because you think, wait a second, a car just killed somebody. That's horrible. And that is horrible. And I agree. But just as with false positives, which we kind of accept to avoid extremely high false negative rates, I can see that a machine that makes mistakes is almost a good thing. I mean, it's not a good thing. A good thing is maybe wrong, but it's not necessarily a reason to not use these systems. And I think that's a cultural element, which I added to the blog simply because I felt like this is, if they expect perfection, you would try it, and then basically it wouldn't work because perfection wouldn't be achieved and the machines would make mistakes. And that you have to kind of accept it. There's a really good comment, which I'll detour to a comment. And it's a comment about AI replacing MDR. I had a big fight on Twitter about a year ago over this subject. And the subject was the following. I was thinking about it and I felt like, hey, vendors who sell AI SOC are kind of already good enough to replace a really bad MSSP. And in my analyst days, in my days at Gartner, I've seen really bad MSSP experiences from customers. I've seen things, and I think that one of them actually made it to a paper, so I can probably quote it without any attribution. Somebody said, we're kind of okay with our MSSP. They're okay. They're not that bad, but we had to hire an intern to delete all of their alerts. And I was like, what? Wait, what? Hold on. You're okay with them. They're fine, right? Yeah, mostly fine. But you had to hire an intern to delete their alerts. Like, are you sure they're fine? Like, what are you using them for? And the conversation went somewhere else. But replacing that type of MSSP and MDR is easily possible with AI. Moreover, you can replace it without AI. You can just delete an alerts. And then but when people ask this question in good faith, they kind of ask usually about replacing a middling or mid-quality MSSP MDR, not the top tier elite ex-Mandiant crew that detects APTs all the time, but kind of like normal MSSP MDR. And I feel like we are nearing the yes on that question. And there are enough companies, again, I don't want to be a vendor shill to name too many, but there are enough modern AI-powered MDR shops that to me are achieving this. I've spoken to 10x guys. I've spoken to a couple of others, and I feel like they are getting there to replace a mid-quality MSSP, if not the elite MSSP, with mostly machines. But of course, humans are heavily involved as well. It's just that the result is substantially more machines than humans. Okay, so to continue down, the fourth is boring. And the reason it's boring is it's sort of like initially I thought it's a spin-off of number one, where I felt like, yeah, well, it's about data access. But it's not only about data access, because some of the stuff is about like systems don't have APIs don't support what you need, stuff doesn't interoperate, and the actually fun one, systems have APIs, everything works out, but they assume that you'd query once a minute. But then agents query them 50 times a second for some agentic brain reasons, and things crash. I've seen it with EDRs, where EDR API was meant to be used for IR, meaning once a day somebody queries it, and then some machine shows up and queries it 50 times a second, and something breaks. So yes, I think the modern tech stack is important because some of the things of that sort may blow up. Given that we have 4 minutes, I wanted to briefly touch on the last one, which is kind of another somewhat fuzzy one, but it has it emerged. I initially put together 4 pillars, and I was about to publish it, and then somebody said, "What about the metrics? And what about them? Metrics are important whether you use AI or not." And I said, "Well, how would you know things got better if you deployed AI?" And I said, "Well, you'd see it here, here, here." And it's like, okay, so metrics. Okay, yeah, well, metrics, but it's not just metrics, but it's also metrics and improvements. It's almost like somebody is asking me about some stupid ROI questions, like what is the ROI of this AI tech or that AI tech, and I'm like, how would I know? I don't really have enough examples like to summarize, and I haven't asked enough people about if they paid $1 million for some system, have they gotten 1.3 million back? I mean, this to me, I'm not a big fan of API of ROI in security anyway. But with this aside, I want to know that things got better. And it's very easy to go wrong with this. People pointed out immediately that things would be faster no matter what if you use AI or even if you use technology, period, for certain tasks, because machines are faster than humans. But if you track speed and not track quality, you may have something that's 20% cheaper, 5 times faster, and 10 times worse. So that may be a bad deal. And even, well, it is a bad deal. Or it may be something that's 10% better and 2 times more expensive. It's like, okay, that's probably still a bad deal. And I've had a couple of fights with vendors who charge AI SOC vendors who charge per alert, like per actual alert, because I kind of thought, like, if I have too many, I can't afford them. If I have too few, I don't need them. So if you're, is there like a narrow window where I need them? But this aside, metrics here matter quite a bit, because I think that there's one line that I'll just basically drag over here and say, how would you know you got better? This line. If you can, after adding AI, answer the what got better question. And to answer what got better question, it probably implies a degree of metrics and measurement before you added AI. And now you look at this and say, oh, look, my MTTD is higher, but also my accuracy and my other things is better, or something bad became less, or something good became more. So to me, this matters. And given how many SOCs don't measure well with no regard to AI, I added the 5th pillar because I wanted to point out that you won't have a degree of measurement, and you can also point out as part of process maturity, but measurement is what gets you an answer to, are you doing better? So that's the 5 pillars. I am obviously very happy to hear comments, questions over email, chat, Twitter, LinkedIn, random other channel, Carrier Pigeon. My window is open. Carrier Pigeon would make it. So this is kind of where I am with this.
This was great. This is really interesting. I can't help but feel like I want to have a deeper discussion. One thing that I've noticed that I think isn't illuminated enough is that people talk about AI and security very much at the AI analyst kind of level, right? Like, it's kind of this assumption that the thing AI does is, finds the bad guys, responds to alerts. That being said, the reality is, I think there is a lot more to running a SOC and to running SOC operations than just that last mile almost. And there is an incredible opportunity for AI tooling to be used as a tool by the existing analysts. And my thesis is that whereas replacing an analyst with an AI is sort of like a very singular problem, a very difficult singular problem, making a human analyst 20 times more effective is a very, very large problem space where there's a ton of really low-hanging fruit opportunities to go and do those. So, but I don't know how much experiments have been done there by some companies. I know certainly we work with a bunch of people that kind of do that within their SOC, and it's really interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Do you have any parting thoughts on that?
This is actually a really good discussion to have in a separate slot, because I think to me is a use case, this discussion. You're right. People rush to triaging. People rush to, oh yeah, we're just gonna have the tier 1, tier 2, whatever triage replacement. But if anybody cares, my dream use case is I have a bucket of threat intel, which of unknown quality. I get a shovel, I shovel it in some kind of a funnel, and at the output of a funnel, I get the detection content that works for my environment. And this to me is a critical point. It's very easy to turn TI into detections, but it's very hard to turn TI into detections that work for me in my peculiar environment with my, oh wait, EDR triggered on Dropbox update kind of stuff. I want the bucket of TI rules that work for me, and then some kind of a machine where I crank the handle and it turns TI of unknown threat intel of unknown quality into rules that work for me. Like, I haven't seen this because I feel like the local context consideration in AI is kind of low. And a lot of smart people are working on this, but I haven't seen the result. I think that it's just that to me, it's a really game-changing use case for SOC. Has nothing to do with alert triage, but it's also kind of tricky, because engineering local context engineering that, oh yeah, we would never do this thing here, because you do this thing here, this group of servers would light up right away with false positives at 92% rates. What are you talking about? No, we would never do it here. But I want the machine to consider this. And whether it would do it by going through JIRA tickets or by going with past cases, I don't know. But the point is that they don't in most cases today. And I really want this workable for me content, and not just quote unquote good detection content. Here's good SPL made of TI. Yeah, good for whom? Good for you as a designer, or good for random client? But I don't really have the rule that just works well for me.
I love it. I love it. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. We will chat. I love that idea. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in. That was a super interesting discussion. I think you already addressed, if folks want to get in touch, it sounds like there's many different ways. And we will see everybody next week for the next Defender Fridays. All right. Thank you.